Welcome to Straightforward Conversation with Gary Hunter. My guest today is David Roach, an ordained elder and pastor of the Plains United Methodist Church. Dave grew up in Ironton, Ohio, but graduated from Logan High School. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Communications from Ohio University and a Master of Divinity degree from the Methodist Theological School. Since 1992, Dave has been the pastor of the Plains United Methodist Church. Tonight's topic is going to be religion and its role in society. Good evening, Dave.
Good evening.
Dave, I'd like to start tonight's discussion by just asking you, why did you want to be a pastor?
Gary, I think as a Christian, all of us have a calling to be involved in ministry. To others, to some comes a unique calling to leadership in the church. It's not something I think that I just sat down one day and said, gee, I think I would like to be a pastor. It's something that came gradually, but very firmly. I think it's a spiritual dimension to it, in which God led me that direction.
I think that our listeners might be interested in knowing what you do in a typical day or a typical week, excluding Sundays. We all have an idea of what you do on Sundays, but what do you do on the other 5 or 6 days a week that you work? And I assume it's the other 6 days a week you work.
Well, believe it or not, we actually do work more than a couple of hours on Sunday. We do more than that. It is a very demanding job. Most people don't realize that. There's a tremendous amount of administration to running the church. In essence, I am the chief executive officer of that organization. But I don't think that's the most important thing I do. A lot of what I do has to do with study and preparation for those hours on Sunday morning. But that's not it either. A lot of what I do has to do with working with people, not only offering myself by means of comfort, but also in training and preparing people to understand what it means to be Christians at work and in ministry in the world today, teaching, Bible study, to help them have the foundation underneath, the spiritual dimension, as well as the intellectual knowledge of what it means to be God's people, and then to also come up with ways and structures of helping them then go out and be in ministry and mission to the world. It's a full-time job.
We all have an image, I think, of a church 20 years ago as the little rural country church that served a very localized community and dealt with just their specific wants and desires. Can you comment upon, as you see it, what the difference in the operation and role of operation of a church today from, say, 20 years ago? How's it evolved and what is it today?
Well, Gary, I think the church is very much different today than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I think the church had its role and place in the community established for it. It was considered 20 years ago probably a whole lot more so as a community center, a place where people came and went. I don't think that's quite the case today as much as it was 20 years ago. It used to be the church could just exist and wait for people to come in to the church. They could come to us and we would just have to be prepared for them to come. I don't think that's the case today. I think we live in a much faster-paced society where people have so many more demands placed on their time and their talents and their resources. And so I think today it's a matter of us being much more visible intentionally, much more so of us needing to go out into the community rather than waiting for the community to come to us. I think that's a major difference.
Are churches today more global in nature rather than local in nature? And churches have always been affiliated in, quote, the global sense with a master mother church or organization. But how do you see that today? Does your church, for instance, participate in the global arena, or is it just strictly in the local arena?
I'm not for sure you can give a sweeping answer to that. I think there are still a lot of churches that are still pretty much focused just in that community and upon their ministries. But for our church, and I think for a lot of churches, we have become much more global. I think a lot of that has to do with the society that we live in. No longer can we just live in our community and not realize what's going outside in the world. With all of the technology, we can't ignore what's happening out there. And I think scripturally, as well as from our heritage, the call is to go out not just to our own, but to concentric circles, reaching out to people. From our tradition, John Wesley, even as far back as that tradition says, the world is my parish. And so it's not a new idea, but I think it's one that we can't ignore.
When we think of churches and the makeup of their congregations, at least the image in my mind tends to be a more elderly group of individuals as the backbone of the church, and certainly in proportion to their relation to population, a much higher percentage than younger people. First, two-part question. Do you see that as the case today? And if so, how do you develop a plan or entice people or interest people of all different age groups in becoming interested in your church?
It's a big question. First of all, I think, again, it depends from church to church. I think in our local congregation, we have a pretty good mix. I would say we do probably have more elderly, but it's a mix. I think the challenge, first of all, is to realize that those folk are a tremendous resource. To say that we have an abundance of older people in our congregation is not derogatory. They're a tremendous resource, oftentimes untapped. So that's not something necessarily bad, but we dare not allow it to stop there. We also have to be reaching out to those who are younger. And I think the way that we need to do that has to do with meeting the real needs in their lives and to help them understand that the Christian faith really does address itself to where the rubber meets the road. If what we have to say from the pulpit and if what we have to say in our Bible teaching and in our programming is not relevant to where they are and what's happening in their lives, they won't be there. And that's part of the problem with the churches today, I think, is that we have not changed with the needs of the people and addressed what the needs of different age groups are, and they are different. And if you only focus on one issue and meeting one particular need, that's the group you'll reach.
I think we think that age groups in general tend to further the concept of that group staying in power, if you will, to use the term loosely. How do you encourage, and I normally would think of, as you said, elderly people being a very valuable resource, but I also would think of them as being a little bit more resistive to change, a little bit more resistive to passing the gauntlet on to the next group to carry on with projects and more do-it-ourselves kind of. How do you deal with those issues, if you see them as issues?
Oh, they are issues. Power is always an issue. Even in the church, it's an issue. I think we need to change the imagery. I'm not comfortable with the image of passing the gauntlet because it's not a matter of one person having it and then giving it to another. It's a matter of sharing the gauntlet. To realize that the ministry of the church and the calling that comes to all of us is much bigger than just one little seat of power. And those who have valid ministries in the church, I don't see the imagery of taking that away from them and giving it to someone else. There are so many needs and so many ministries new ministries and new needs that can be met. It's a matter of bringing more people on board and helping them to meet a specific need that they're gifted in. I don't like the idea of taking power from one and giving power to another. There's enough for everyone.
Stay tuned. Dave and I will return after this commercial break. When we return, I'd like to ask Dave about how his church accommodates the busy lifestyles that we all experience in today's society. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. My guest this evening is David Roach, pastor of the Plains United Methodist Church. Dave, I'd like to start off this segment of the show by asking you to first realize that we all have very busy schedules anymore, and life is very, very busy for just about everybody. If you recognize that concept, how do you as a pastor deal with people's busy lifestyles so that they can accommodate and feel comfortable in participation in a religious experience?
I think that's a reality that the church is going to have to deal with. Oftentimes we try to ignore it, but I don't believe we'll be able to. In our congregation, we have tried to recognize that and deal with it. One of the ways we have done that is to offer a second worship service. It's a worship service that meets at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning. For those who have very busy Sunday schedules, they can come in and...
Which is the one where you see me most
Which is where you happen to be most of the time. Yeah, you can come in at 8 o'clock and still spiritually be fed and nourished and encouraged and hopefully challenged. And the service is a shorter service, which is also another alternative type option. And then either be out of that worship service and on your way home by 9 o'clock, or hopefully spend another hour in Sunday school and be out by 10. And even getting worship and Sunday school, you're out by 10 o'clock and have the full day ahead of you. That's a reality that we need to take into account not only in worship, but also in the rest of the life of the church, because the church's life is much more than Sunday. Meeting-wise, one of the things that we have done is tried to consolidate meetings, put meetings back-to-back on the same evening, so that the leadership can come in and meet as a leadership team, and then break off into smaller committees and handle those all together on one evening, to try to cut down on some of the evening meetings. Another reality that I think we as the church have to face, and especially as churches grow and become larger, this might go back to the question of how things are different now than they were 20 years ago. I think we need to realize that the day is gone when there will be people who will be active in doing everything that's offered in the life of the church. And that's a hard message to get through, especially to some of the folk who are from that era where every time the door was open, they were there. I know in our church that if you're there every time the door is open, you will be there all the time. And so now one way to accommodate the busy schedule is to realize that there are things that you will participate in, be active in, for your good, as well as there will be things in which you can offer yourself to others, and you pick and choose.
You don't encourage people to be all things to all people.
No, I don't. You know, there was a day in the life of the church when people's lives were much slower and not as demanding, and when there was not as much going on in the life of the church, when that could happen. But I don't think that's a reality today, at least in our congregation. People just cannot do everything every time the door is open because there's too much being offered.
Do you utilize newsletters mailed out to people?
Yes, we do. We have an extensive newsletter mailing that we send out to keep people involved and to help people be able to see what the offerings are and know what's being offered, and then they can make a much more informed choice as to where they're going to invest their time. Rather than just coming to everything hoping to catch what they need here and there, they can be much more specific and be there when they need to be there to meet their needs as well as to help meet other needs.
How about the length of your sermon? Has it gotten longer or shorter as people's lifestyles are busier?
Me personally, I've never been a long-winded preacher. And that's not to say that those who preach longer aren't good pastors or preachers. My style of preaching is different than others, and different is okay. I will usually...
Would you agree that people's attention spans are shorter?
I think so. I think so, and I usually try to keep my messages anywhere from 15 to 18 minutes. If I'm really on a roll, maybe 20.
But you see a lot of nodding of the heads.
Yeah, when they start nodding, it's time to wrap it up. But no, I think the messages now are different than they used to be. The content, I hope, the essence of the message is still the same. But we need to realize the style and the medium, it's okay to be different. And so I try to keep shorter messages that are not so laden that they're heavy. I think we need to keep things upbeat and short.
Another area that I've seemed to have noticed some change is in the area of music and in the role of religion. It's not just the traditional songs that have been around for ages, so to speak, that are being utilized now. There are a lot of very upbeat types of music that are being used in church. Do you see that as an increased role for music in the overall scheme of delivery of religious services, if you will, to the public? And do you see innovation occurring in this area?
To your first question, do I see an increased role of music? I don't think so. I think throughout the history of the church and through our tradition, music has been vital. I think music has pretty much always been right at the center of the message. Music is changing because life is changing. People are changing. And I think for us in the church, we need to realize that and acknowledge that and move with it. That doesn't mean the essence of the message changes, but again, the medium does, the style does. And I think we need to recognize that in the church. The United Methodist Church, just within the last couple of years, has just come out with a new hymnal. I think the new hymnal recognizes that. There are more praise courses, more contemporary styles of music, still holding on to the wonderful old hymns of the church that are still there because they're still valid. But we need to realize that as we try to reach younger people, their music is different. And different isn't always bad. You go back to the Wesleys again, from the tradition that I come from. The things that we think are so wonderfully sacred now, if you knew from whence the music came, we might have a different story, because it came from areas that weren't sacred, and then the message was just changed using that style of music. And so I think we need to realize if we're going to reach the younger folk, we need to be willing to look at different styles of music, and I think we're doing that in our congregation.
This brings me to probably a little bit tougher question for you to answer. Do you think in trying to reach people that a pastor, a minister has to change his approach of delivery of his message from the fire and brimstone, hell hath no fury concept to, as you're doing tonight with me, the much more conversational, persuasive approach?
Again, I think that varies from pastor to pastor and varies from church to church. For me, I have to do what I'm comfortable with and where my conscience leads. Hellfire and damnation isn't the direction I choose to go. The primary focus of my ministry and my preaching is grace. That doesn't mean that we ignore the idea of judgment, but we just choose to approach it from the other side.
You say we don't ignore the idea of judgment, but do you think, taking off on that theme, do you think that churches have to be careful not to become judgmental of individual parishioners?
The danger with becoming judgmental is when we lose focus of who we are, when we begin to see ourselves as the church as being a secluded group of holy folk who set themselves apart not to have contact with the outside world. Then yes, we become judgmental. We become ineffective as the church. We need to realize that the church is not a secluded group of holy people. We are to be those who have experienced God's love and grace in our life, and then who are then called to make a difference in the world of which we're a part. And when we lose that focus, then we become judgmental. We need to realize that we, as those who are a part of the church, are no more perfect than the people that we oftentimes become judgmental of. We are all people of grace.
Well, stay tuned. Dave and I will return after this commercial break. When we return, I want to ask Dave whether he sells religion or he lets religion sell itself. And I also want to ask him about whether he believes religion helps keep the family intact. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. My guest this evening is David Roach, pastor of the Plains United Methodist Church. Dave, I'd like to ask you maybe what you might consider a tough question at the moment. Do you sell religion, or do you let religion sell itself?
It's a complex question. As I said earlier, I believe the days are gone when we can just, as a congregation, wait for people to come to us. I think that we as the church need to be those who are out in the community. I guess I'm not comfortable with the term selling. I'm much more comfortable with a good religious phrase, sharing our faith with those outside the church. I think community image is very, very important in the life of the church. And if you want to consider that selling, well, okay, I guess I can live with that. But we need to let the folk know that the churches are there, what we're doing. We need to realize that people have images of us, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And so we need to be mindful of how the community sees us. And part of that is projecting an image to them, not only on an individual basis as individual Christians in the church talk one-on-one, but I think also on a larger scale.
There's at least one denomination that I'm familiar with that actively advertises on radio and TV. How do you feel about that topic?
Oh, I have no problem with that at all. I think that's healthy. I think it has to do with the idea that we believe what we have is valid and important and something that really can help people. And I think if we really believe that, to set on that message, to set on that resource, and not aggressively promote it, that would be terrible.
Do you think that religion helps keep the family intact?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Why?
Why? Well, I think an important message of the faith is that of commitment, is that of our responsibility to each other, to the vows that we make. I think an important part of the message of the faith has to do with God's command to love one another. And I think that's what holds the family together, is that kind of commitment, that kind of love, that kind of concern and compassion for each other. Yeah, the old adage, the family that prays together stays together, might be trite, but I think the Christian faith is integral in helping the families to be caring and effective in their love and concern and interaction with each other. We also have to realize, though, that families need not be what we always consider to be what it used to be. There are a lot of single parents out there who also need what the church has to offer and has a lot to offer the church, and if they are in that situation, we need to acknowledge them as a legitimate family unit in the life of the church. And for those who choose not to be married, to remain single, that too is a legitimate lifestyle. And I see that even in the Scriptures as a very legitimate means of living one's life.
So what you're telling me then is that the traditional concept, if you will, of 30, 40, 50 years ago of family has had to evolve to a broader concept today to accommodate the lifestyles of the masses.
I think so, and I don't think that's a matter of compromise on our part. Even in the Scriptures you read...
It's recognizing reality.
Yeah, it's recognizing the reality of life that's not just today, but that was even in the scriptural time. Paul, who chose to be single, and I think that's a legitimate lifestyle if that's the way they choose. And then there are folks who are caught by circumstances that perhaps were out of their control, who beyond their own power or choice find themselves single or as single parents. We as the church have a responsibility to them and help them to realize that they are loved and are an integral part of what it means to be the church.
In the time we have left, I would like you to discuss one more topic, and that particular topic is stress in people's lives. I think there's really no doubt about it that one of the problems potentially in marriage breakup is stress. One of the problems in mental problems with people now is stress. There's stress in society. What, if anything, are you as a church, in the broad sense, doing to deal with this societal problem?
It is a very important issue. In fact, we just finished at our church a quarter in which a Sunday school class devoted its entire quarter on dealing with stress from a Christian perspective. I think the faith has a lot to do with addressing the issue of stress and helping to set priorities, helping us to realize that we have value not because of what we do but who we are. I think a lot of stress has to do with people searching for identity and self-worth and value by what they do. And if that's where you find your self-value, then how much is enough? Well, just a little bit more than what you're doing. And so we need to help people realize that they are important and have value, not because they are busy and doing so much, but simply because of who they are. They're God's child.
In 25 words or less, convince me why I should be affiliated with the church.
Why should you belong to the church? Because I believe we offer some alternatives to what society as a whole offers. I think we offer and acknowledge a spiritual dimension to life that oftentimes you find nowhere else. I think we offer some truths, some basic truths and realities to life that you'll not find elsewhere. I think we can help people understand who they are.
And I would add one more. You can offer me a better life, right?
I think so.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
This has been Straightforward Conversation with Garry Hunter. My guest this evening has been David Roach, pastor of the Plains United Methodist Church. Good evening.